My name's Rachel Carter, and at 25, I never imagined my college graduation would feel like justice finally served. Standing next to my younger brother Caleb, both of us in matching caps and gowns, it should have been one of those picture-perfect moments. But the truth? That moment was years in the making, built on a foundation of favoritism and silent battles. I still remember the sting of those words. She earned it. You didn't. It's wild how a single sentence can live in your bones for years. If you've ever felt like you had to fight twice as hard for something that came so easily to someone else, drop a like and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Because this one's for you. Let me take you back. I grew up in a typical middle-class neighborhood just outside Columbus, Ohio. Our brick colonial on Evergreen Lane looked like something out of a real estate brochure. Neatly trimmed hedges, a basketball hoop in the driveway, and a refrigerator covered in school projects and report cards. But don't let the suburban charm fool you. Behind those walls was a family divided by unspoken hierarchies. My dad, Brian Carter, worked as a tax attorney, and my mom, Janet, was a middle school science teacher. They were the kind of parents who packed your lunch and showed up to every teacher conference. But only if your name was Caleb. My brother was 2 years younger, with easy charm, a killer jump shot, and a GPA that hovered somewhere around just good enough. But he had one thing I didn't: my parents' undivided attention. From the time we were kids, the differences in treatment were so obvious it was almost laughable. Every Christmas morning, Caleb would be tearing into drones, new iPads, or the latest Xbox games. Me? I'd unwrap a pair of fleece-lined socks or a cheap sketch pad from the clearance aisle. When I'd ask, Mom would just say, "Your brother needs a little more encouragement. He's got so much potential." And me? Apparently, I was just fine. Not special, not gifted. Just the reliable daughter who didn't need much. School was the same story. When Caleb entered the science fair, both my parents would take off work, help him build elaborate models of volcanoes that practically erupted live. When I had my art shows or math competitions, maybe Mom would swing by during her planning period, if I reminded her. "Art's not a career, Rachel, it's a hobby," Dad would say, as if my ambitions weren't worth real support. The only person who truly saw me was my grandma, Evelyn. Every summer, she'd take me out to her cabin on Lake Montrose. It was this peaceful little place with creaky floorboards, a fishing dock, and more love than I ever felt at home. We'd sit for hours on the back porch, me sketching the water. By the time I hit high school, I'd swapped sketching for spreadsheets. I joined the entrepreneurship club, took every advanced business course offered, and basically lived in the library. Numbers came naturally to me. Budgets, projections, marketing strategies. I loved it all. As a sophomore, I won first place in the statewide business plan competition. My economics teacher, Mr. Landon, was so impressed he called my parents personally. Mom's response? "That's nice. Can you help Caleb with his English paper tonight? It's due tomorrow." It was like yelling into a void. Junior year, I started working part-time at a local smoothie shop to save for college. I was pulling 20-hour weeks while holding down a 4.0 GPA. Meanwhile, Caleb joined the varsity basketball team. My parents were at every game with posters and matching hoodies, screaming like he was NBA bound. By senior year, Caleb and I were both applying to college. He'd skipped a grade in middle school, which meant we were graduating together. We both set our sights on Brighton University, a prestigious school with a killer business program and a top-tier political science department. I applied for business. Caleb went for poli-sci. We got our acceptance letters the same day. I still remember the flutter in my chest when I opened mine. Full acceptance, the letter read. I had done it. I had clawed my way there. I walked into the kitchen, holding that envelope like it was gold. I got in, I said, smiling so hard it hurt. Dad looked up from his phone and muttered, "That's nice, honey." And then, like some cosmic punchline, Caleb burst through the front door 5 minutes later. "I got into Brighton," he shouted, waving his own letter in the air. My parents lost it. Mom was crying. Dad popped a bottle of champagne. They started planning a party before Caleb had even taken off his backpack. They acted like I hadn't even spoken. 2 weeks later came the dinner that changed everything. It was a rare evening where we were all at the table. No phones, no TV, just spaghetti and forced small talk. Then Dad cleared his throat and said, "We need to talk about college tuition." I assumed this meant a game plan for both of us. But his eyes stayed locked on Caleb. "We've been saving for your education for years," he told him. "Brighton's expensive, but we can cover it completely." Caleb nodded, grateful. I waited for my turn. None came. After an uncomfortable silence, I asked, "What about me?" Dad looked at me like I'd interrupted a business call. "Rachel," he said slowly, she deserved it. You didn't." I excused myself from the table, went upstairs, locked the door, and cried until my throat hurt. 17 years of trying to win their approval, of going above and beyond, of believing that if I just worked hard enough, they'd finally see me. All shattered in one dinner. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen with red, swollen eyes and a knot in my chest. "How could you plan Caleb's future like that and just leave me out?" I asked, voice shaking. Mom sipped her coffee like we were talking about the weather. "Rachel, we had to make a choice. I had better grades. I've worked part-time since sophomore year." Dad folded his newspaper with a sharp snap. "And you've also been distracted with side jobs and hobbies. Caleb's been focused." Hobbies. He meant my business plans, my internships, my work experience. I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked away. And 2 hours later, I packed a bag and drove to Grandma Evelyn's lake house. Grandma Evelyn opened the door before I even knocked. I didn't have to say a word. She could see it on my face. No questions, no lectures, just a warm hug that let me cry it out in silence. Later, sitting on her old floral couch, I finally told her everything. The scholarship rejections, the loan applications, my parents' investment strategy, all of it. She listened quietly, her wrinkled hand wrapped around mine. When I finished, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Rachel, sometimes the most painful betrayals are the ones that force us to become exactly who we were meant to be." She couldn't write me a check. Her retirement income barely covered groceries and medication. But what she gave me was something far more powerful. Belief. Absolute, unwavering belief that I could still do this. "Promise me you'll go to Brighton anyway," she said. "Don't let their narrow minds shrink your future." That night, I made up my mind. I was going to Brighton University, with or without my parents' help. The next morning, I hit the ground running. I applied to every scholarship grant and work-study program I could find. I begged my high school counselor, Miss Perez, to help me sort through the financial aid chaos. She stayed late for 2 weeks straight helping me draft essays and prep paperwork. "I've had a lot of strong students," she said one night. "But you? You're fire, Rachel. The world just hasn't figured it out yet." Out of 27 scholarship applications, I landed 5. Small ones, $500 here, $1,000 there, but enough to get me started. With a mix of federal aid and a private student loan co-signed, while Caleb got a new laptop, noise-canceling headphones, and a $300 desk chair, I packed my thrift store clothes into hand-me-down suitcases. I printed out a $30 IKEA desk and scrounged old dishes from Grandma's kitchen. The day before move-in, Mom stopped by my room. She handed me a set of faded twin sheets. "They're clean," she said, awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. "From the linen closet. You'll need something for your bed." It was the first time she acknowledged that I was going to college, too. On move-in day, my parents loaded Caleb's gear into the family's sleek SUV, chatting about career tracks and internships. I followed behind them in my rusty 2006 Toyota Corolla that coughed every time I braked. No one asked if I needed help with boxes. As we approached the university gates, they turned off toward the luxury dorms. I kept driving to my little apartment off East Avenue. When I parked and looked around at the cracked sidewalk and yellowed grass, I didn't feel resentment. I felt ready. Still terrified, but ready. My apartment was rough. The paint peeled in the bathroom. The fridge rattled, and the mattress sagged like a hammock. My roommates were kind, but exhausted. One worked nights at a diner. The other juggled babysitting gigs. We were all hustling just to exist. That first night, I sat on my bed, listening to my upstairs neighbor's music thump through the floorboards and wondered, can I really do this? Then my phone lit up, a message from Grandma Evelyn. "Diamonds don't shine because they're born shiny. They shine because of pressure. You're already shining." The tears came fast, but this time they weren't sad. They were the kind that said, "I can do this." The next day, I walked into Brighton's financial aid office with a planner full of color-coded tabs and enough paperwork to choke a fax machine. That's where I met Ms. Wright, the assistant director. When I told her my story, she raised an eyebrow. "You're working 2 jobs and taking a full load of business classes. Girl, that's not just grit, that's strategy." She handed me a stack of additional grant applications and told me to check in weekly. That would become our ritual. A few days before classes started, I got a surprise call from Ms. Perez, my high school counselor. "I convinced the business department to give you a $1,000 scholarship," she said. "The teachers chipped in from their own pockets." I sat down on the floor and cried right there, clutching the check like it was made. All the budgeting, planning, and project experience I gained from hustling my way into college, it made my business classes easier. I already understood marketing because I had to sell myself in 27 scholarship essays. I already got accounting because I was managing a zero-margin budget daily. Midway through the fall semester, Professor Daniels, my intro to business instructor, asked me to stay after class. "Rachel," he said, "you're not just keeping up, you're leading. Have you thought about starting something of your own?" That tiny spark Grandma Evelyn once pointed out, it was finally catching fire. At the same time, I met someone who would become my anchor, my roommate, Talia. Talia noticed me crashing on the couch one night after a double shift and quietly started leaving leftovers in the fridge with notes like, "Eat this before your stomach eats you." Eventually, she sat me down and said, "You're gonna burn out. Let me help." She became my co-pilot. She edited my essays, made flashcards for my econ exams, and kept a standing Sunday meal prep tradition that literally saved my sanity. When she found out I was skipping meals to afford textbooks, she started cooking double portions and refused to let me pay her back. "Family isn't always blood," she said. "Sometimes it's the people who see you when others look right past you." By the time spring semester rolled around, I had a rhythm. Exhausting, yes, but sustainable. I studied, worked, slept barely, and slowly climbed my way towards something that looked like a future. But just when I started to feel stable, life threw another curveball. The coffee shop cut hours for everyone. Suddenly, my income dropped 40% and my rent was due. I panicked. With no family safety net, no extra loan capacity, and no margin for error, I was one late bill away from having to drop out. I ran, literally ran to Miss Wright in financial aid. She listened carefully, then smiled. "You qualify for our Emergency Resilience Grant. And," she added, flipping through my records, "Professor Daniels just nominated you for a paid research assistant position." It paid more than the coffee shop and aligned with my studies. It felt like winning the lottery. Working with Professor Daniels on a project studying entrepreneurship in low-income communities lit a new fire in me. The data, the strategy, the idea that hustle could become impact, it all clicked. That's when the idea for my own business started to take shape. At night, in between assignments and shift work, I began drafting a plan for a virtual assistant service targeting small local businesses. Businesses like the ones I saw in my research that couldn't afford full-time help but desperately needed it. By the time sophomore year rolled around, my life was a balancing act performed on a tightrope made of coffee, grit, and blind determination. I was juggling a full course load, a paid research position with Professor Daniels, and this tiny side hustle I had started from my dorm room desk, a virtual assistant service for small businesses. It began humbly. A local florist near campus needed help managing their email orders. Then a small tax prep office needed someone to format client reports. Word got around. Soon, I had 3 regular clients and had registered a simple domain name for my new venture, Brightline Admin Services. I used every tool in my business classes to scale it: basic SEO strategies, social media marketing, time tracking systems. I didn't have startup capital, just raw hustle and a beat-up laptop. But it was working. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just keeping up, I was ahead. Professor Daniels noticed. One afternoon during our research meeting, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Rachel, this thing you're building, it's not just a side gig, it's a model. You're solving a real niche problem." A few weeks later, he recommended me to speak at a student entrepreneurship panel. I almost said no. I was working 35 hours a week and barely sleeping, but Talia convinced me to do it. "You've got something to say," she said, "and people need to hear it." The panel changed everything. One of the attending professors, Dr. Yoon from the digital media department, pulled me aside afterward and offered to mentor me. He introduced me to grant opportunities for student-run startups, helped me create a streamlined website, and even let me use the department's studio to shoot a professional video pitch. The grant committee liked it, so much so I was awarded $7,500 in startup funding that spring. That money changed my life. I hired 2 classmates, both from underrepresented backgrounds, who were struggling financially just like I had been. I trained them, paid them fairly, and together we expanded Brightline's services to include bookkeeping and social media scheduling. By junior year, Brightline had 8 regular clients, and I'd been featured in a local entrepreneurship blog. We weren't some viral startup, but we were stable, profitable, and growing. Meanwhile, Caleb, he was struggling. Turns out, political science wasn't the easy ride he'd expected. Senior year hit him hard, specifically, his capstone thesis. He lacked research experience, time management skills, and honestly, any real passion for the field. One night in late October, I got a knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find Caleb, looking completely defeated, clutching a half-written thesis and a stack of note cards. "I'm failing," he said, barely above a whisper. "Professor." It would have been easy to turn him away. Lord knows he never helped me when I was drowning, but as much as I wanted to stay mad, I couldn't ignore that he was finally reaching out, not with entitlement, but with vulnerability. "Come in," I said. "Let's take a look." That night marked the first real conversation we'd had in years. As I guided him through building a research outline and explaining methodology, I realized how far I'd come. All the skills I'd built while patching together my own future were now second nature. Over the next few weeks, we worked together every other night. I helped him reframe his arguments, organize his sources, and stay accountable. And something else began to shift. Caleb started asking questions about my business, about how I balanced it all, about how I stayed motivated when things were so hard. "I had no idea you were doing all this," he admitted one night. "Mom and Dad always said you were doing fine, but they never explained what that really meant." I looked at him carefully. "Fine is relative, Caleb. I was working 60-hour weeks and skipping meals while you were flying home every other weekend for Mom's pot roast." He didn't try to argue. He just nodded. "I get it now, and I'm sorry." I didn't expect his apology to fix anything, but it meant more than I was ready to admit. As the holidays approached, we started hearing from our parents more often. They were gearing up for graduation season, planning parties, sending group texts about cap and gown orders, but somehow I always seemed to be left out of the details. At one point, Mom texted, "We're throwing a family dinner before the ceremony for Caleb. Of course, you're welcome too if you're not too busy with your work." That "if" said everything. It wasn't until February that things took a real turn. Dean Collins, head of the business school, called me into her office. I assumed it was about scholarship paperwork, but instead she slid a thick brochure across the table. "The National Business Innovation Challenge," she said. "Your business model qualifies, and I think you have a real shot at winning." The competition offered a $50,000 investment prize, national press, and networking opportunities with top consulting firms. It was the kind of opportunity that could rewrite someone's future. With Professor Daniel's help, I spent the next 6 weeks perfecting my pitch. I practiced in classrooms, coffee shops, even in front of Talia while she chopped vegetables. I fine-tuned every slide, memorized every stat, rehearsed every answer. In April, I traveled to Chicago for the final round. I was the only finalist who had bootstrapped her business while working multiple jobs and self-financing her education. The others had seed funding, family advisors, connections, but I had real-world results, and that's what sealed it. I won. The announcement felt surreal. My photo with the giant check ran on the cover of the university's business magazine. Grandma Evelyn framed it and put it on her wall. Talia threw a tiny apartment party. Even Caleb cried a little when he hugged me. But from my parents? Silence. Not a call. Not a text. Not even a generic congrats message. I wasn't surprised anymore, just disappointed in how predictable they'd become. Then one day, Dean Collins called me back to her office. "The administration is selecting a student speaker for commencement," she said, smiling. "We'd like you to represent the School of Business." I blinked. "You want me to speak at graduation?" "Your journey is the exact story we want to showcase. Resilience, vision, leadership. You've not only earned your seat, you've built your table." I accepted. Of course I accepted. What I didn't know was that the university had one more surprise in store for graduation day. One that would leave my parents stunned and everyone else on their feet. But I'll get to that soon. For now, I threw myself into writing the most honest, empowering speech I could. It wouldn't be a speech about revenge. It would be about rising. Graduation week hit like a whirlwind. Final papers, business contracts, last-minute speech edits, and of course, invitations. Well, Caleb got a flurry of them. I got a group email from my mom titled Graduation Week Details. It read, "We've rented a house near campus. Family dinner on Friday night for Caleb's celebration. You're more than welcome to stop by if you're free." If I'm free. That was the extent of my recognition from them. Still an afterthought. I forwarded the email to Talia with one word: classic. But I wasn't going to let that energy ruin what I had worked so hard for. The day before graduation, Grandma Evelyn arrived in town. She stepped out of the bus wearing her signature navy cardigan, holding a small box in her hands. "For you," she said, handing it to me. Inside was a graduation stole, deep blue with embroidered silver script that read, "Diamonds are made under pressure." "I had it custom made," she said, eyes watery, "so you'd never forget what you've become." I hugged her so tightly she wheezed. That evening at rehearsal, Dean Collins gave me a knowing smile. "You ready for your big moment?" "I think so," I said. She leaned in and added, "Just be prepared for a slightly extended introduction." Before I could ask what she meant, she winked and walked away. The next morning, the sky was pure blue, not a cloud in sight, the kind of weather that felt personal, like the universe was saying, "You did it." I met Caleb outside the auditorium. He looked sharp in his cap and gown. "You ready, big sister?" he asked. We walked in together, side by side, names just rows apart in the processional order. I spotted our parents in the audience almost immediately, front row, of course, next to Caleb's name card. Dad wore his power suit. Mom had on one of those oversized hats that screamed, "Look at me." They watched Caleb walk in with obvious pride. Me? I don't even think they noticed. I was just 3 seats behind him. But Grandma Evelyn did. She stood the moment I entered, both hands over her heart. That was all the recognition I needed. The ceremony began like all graduations, long speeches, stiff applause, and a lot of people secretly checking their watches. But finally, University President Dr. Hughes returned to the podium and said, "Before we conclude, we'd like to recognize one extraordinary graduate." I sat up straighter. "Rachel Carter, would you please come to the stage?" I stood, heart racing. As I stepped forward, I caught a glimpse of my parents, confusion on their faces, whispering. They had no idea. Dr. Hughes continued, "Ms. Carter is graduating today with a perfect 4.0 GPA, a nationally awarded startup valued in 6 figures, and a full-time consulting offer from one of the country's top firms. What makes her story even more exceptional is that she achieved all of this while fully self-financing her education and building a business that now employs other Brighton students." A collective gasp moved through the audience, and then wild applause. Caleb stood first, clapping with both hands, beaming. Grandma Evelyn wiped a tear from her cheek, and my parents? They looked like statues, frozen. "Miss Carter," President Hughes said, is also this year's recipient of the National Business Innovation Award, and in recognition of her achievements, Brighton University is establishing the Rachel Carter Resilience Scholarship for future students who show exceptional drive despite financial hardship. The entire auditorium stood as I reached the stage. I took the mic. My voice shook at first, but I found my footing fast. 4 years ago, I walked onto this campus with two things: a second-hand backpack and a relentless belief that I belonged here. I didn't have parental funding. I didn't have connections. What I had was pressure, and that pressure made something stronger than diamonds. It made resilience. I paused to let that land. You don't need permission to succeed. You don't need approval to matter. Sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage, because when no one expects much from you, you get to define success on your own terms. When I stepped back from the podium, the standing ovation was thunderous. I caught Caleb's eye. He mouthed, "You crushed it." After my speech, Dean Collins returned to the mic. At Ander Global Consulting, we are proud to announce that Rachel Carter will be joining their Leadership Development Program, and her journey will be featured next month on the cover of Business Forward magazine. Applause again. My parents' faces, pale as ghosts. Later, in the chaos of post-ceremony hugs and selfies, I finally walked over to where they stood. Dad tried to recover first. "That was quite a surprise," he said stiffly. "You've been keeping us in the dark." I smiled politely. "I wasn't hiding anything. You just weren't paying attention." Before they could reply, Caleb swooped in, arm around my shoulder. "Wasn't she amazing? I mean, everyone's talking about her speech." Then he turned to our parents and said, loudly, "Imagine how much more she could have done if she'd had the same support I got." Mom flinched. Aunt Michelle, standing nearby, raised her eyebrows. The family dynamic officially cracked wide open. "We're throwing a small dinner for both of you tonight," Mom said awkwardly. "Just family." "That's kind of you," I replied. "But I already have plans with the people who supported me the past 4 years." Grandma Evelyn linked arms with me. "I'd rather celebrate with folks who recognized her brilliance from the beginning." We walked away. Caleb caught up before we got to the car. "Mind if I tag along?" he asked. "I think I've been celebrating in the wrong direction for a while now." I nodded. "Of course. Let's go where the real celebration is." The celebration at the business school that evening felt like something out of a movie. String lights, catered food, soft jazz, and tables full of professors, mentors, and student entrepreneurs. The sign at the entrance read, "Brighton Honors Rachel Carter, Entrepreneur, Scholar, Leader." As we stepped inside, Talia let out a whistle. "Okay, boss lady, you weren't kidding. This is the real deal." Grandma Evelyn grinned at the banner, her eyes watering again. "I told you," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "Diamond." Professor Daniels found us right away, beaming with pride. "You're the student we always dreamed of having," he said. "And now the whole country knows it." He introduced us to Jennifer Banks, the director at Alexander Global Consulting, the woman who had handpicked me for their elite program. She was sharp, poised, and intimidating, until she smiled and said, "I've read your file twice. We don't often see candidates with your grit and polish. We're lucky to have you." Talia. Caleb stood in a corner, quietly watching the way people greeted me with respect, not obligation. He leaned over and said, This is what real pride looks like, huh? I nodded. It's different when it's earned, not handed out. Afterward, we took a photo in front of the scholarship banner. Me in the center, Grandma Evelyn on one side, Caleb on the other. We laughed at how crooked Caleb's cap was and how Grandma insisted on holding her purse in every shot. I want this framed, she declared. Proof of what love, effort, and a little rebellion can build. That night, Mom texted me. The family dinner is starting. Hope you'll reconsider and come by. I showed it to Grandma and Caleb. What do you think? I asked. Grandma didn't hesitate. They've watched you walk on fire for 4 years. If they want warmth now, they can sit in it. Caleb tilted his head. Could be fun watching them squirm. We laughed, but I also knew there was a part of me that wanted to go. Not for their approval, but to make it unmistakably clear who I was now, and who I'd always been. So we went. The house they'd rented was huge, way more than they needed. Caterers were setting up in the kitchen, and cousins filled the backyard playing cornhole and sipping drinks. When we walked in, conversation dropped. Every head turned. Aunt Michelle approached first. There she is, the superstar. Why didn't your parents tell us about all this? I smiled. They probably didn't know. We were ushered into the dining area where Dad immediately stood to greet us, visibly flustered. Rachel, you made it. We've been, talking all about your speech. Caleb smirked. Funny. Pretty sure it wasn't even mentioned until we walked in. Then came the kicker, Uncle Joe. Loud, blunt, and blessedly oblivious to tension. So wait, he said, voice booming across the table. Rachel's business is worth over 6 figures now? And she did it without a dime from you guys? Silence. Mom stammered. Well, we had to make tough choices. We always knew Rachel was resourceful. Grandma Evelyn leaned in, voice sharp but controlled. No, Janet, you didn't know. You assumed. And now you're trying to rewrite the past to make yourselves look less wrong. Dad attempted to change the subject. We were thinking, Rachel, we could help with your move to New York. Cover part of the deposit or your flight? I blinked. Thanks, I said evenly. But I already paid for everything, and the company's flying me out first class next week. Dad added, We underestimated you. We thought we were doing what made the most sense, but looking back, I see how unfair it was. I nodded. It's a start. But just so we're clear, my worth didn't increase because of what I achieved. It was always there. You just didn't see it. For once, they didn't argue. After dinner, a few younger cousins came over to ask me how I started my business. We sat on the porch, me telling them the truth, not just about marketing strategies, but about choosing yourself when no one else does. Later that week, I moved to New York. My new apartment was small but bright, with windows that let in real sunlight and a coffee shop around the corner. Alexander Global treated me like an equal, not an intern. Within 3 months, I was helping lead my first client project. By 6 months, I was presenting in boardrooms, but I never left Brightline behind. I kept the business running remotely, employing 4 students from Brighton. The scholarship bearing my name had its first recipient, a young woman working nights at a diner while taking a full load of pre-med classes. I wrote her a letter. They may doubt you. Let them. What matters is that you don't doubt yourself. Caleb started volunteering with an educational equity nonprofit. He said helping me changed how he sees the world. Talia and I still call every Sunday, our CEO check-in, we call it. And Grandma Evelyn? She's still holding court at her lake house. She keeps a laminated copy of my business forward cover in her living room, right next to the photo of us in our caps and gowns. One year after graduation, I hosted a scholarship gala at Brighton. My parents came. They sat in the front row, this time as supporters, not skeptics. And afterward, they didn't try to take credit. They just said, "We're proud of you and grateful that you didn't let us stop you." That was enough. Because what I learned is this: validation feels nice, but belief in yourself, that's the real game changer. If you've ever been underestimated, written off, or told you weren't worth investing in, remember this: their failure to see your value doesn't mean it's not there. In fact, sometimes the most powerful advantage you'll ever have is that no one saw you coming. So rise, build, shine, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right.